In the far stretch of the galaxy, there was a council of old alien elders who ruled with cold wisdom and hidden fear. They had heard endless whispers about humans, whispers that painted them as strange creatures of both danger and mystery, whispers that called them strong in ways no other species could explain. The council did not trust those whispers. They did not believe in stories told by traders and wanderers. They wanted proof. They wanted a test. The council gathered in a chamber of silver walls that glowed with soft light. They spoke in hushed voices about the humans, who came from a small blue world. They said humans looked fragile, their bodies thin, their skin soft, their tools simple. Yet somehow these fragile beings survived places where even hardened warriors would fall. The elders wanted to know if humans were truly what the stories claimed. They wanted to see with their own eyes if this species could protect what was weak and helpless. So they created a test, a cruel test. They took the cubs of their own kind, small creatures with fur that shimmered like silver under the light, eyes bright and innocent, tiny hands that reached for warmth. These cubs were precious to the alien race. They were their future, their blood, their hope. Yet the elders placed them in a dangerous forest, a forest filled with sharp fangs and glowing eyes, a forest where even grown hunters walked with fear. Predators roamed there, great beasts with teeth like stone blades and claws that could slice through armor. The cubs had no defense, no weapons, nothing but cries that echoed in the dark. The council then called a human, only one, not an army, not a group, just one man. His name was not spoken, for the elders did not care for names. They cared only for what he could do. They gave him no weapons, no armor, no allies. They told him only one task: protect the cubs, survive with them until the trial ended. Nothing more, nothing less. If he failed, the cubs would perish. If he succeeded, then perhaps the whispers about humans would be true. The human was brought to the edge of the forest. He looked ordinary in the eyes of the council. 2 legs, 2 hands, plain clothes, no shining armor, no glowing eyes, no gift of wings or claws. Yet he walked with steady steps. He entered the forest without asking questions, without fear in his voice. The cubs cried as he reached them, their small bodies shaking, their fur wet with dew, their eyes wide with terror at the sounds of beasts in the trees. He knelt down beside them, his hands gentle, his voice soft. He spoke words they did not understand, but his tone carried calm, his tone carried promise. Far above in the hidden towers of the forest, the council watched through lenses that saw everything. Their cold eyes waited for him to fail. They expected him to run when the first shadow moved. They expected him to crumble when hunger struck. They expected him to fall when teeth and claws closed in. They expected him to leave the cubs behind, because that was the way of most species, survival of self, not protection of others. But humans were strange, and the council wanted to know if the strangeness was truth. Night fell heavy on the forest. Shadows grew thick. The cries of beasts echoed from every corner. Red eyes blinked from the dark. The cubs shivered and pressed against the human, their small bodies trembling like leaves in wind. The human looked around and searched the ground. He gathered dry branches. He rubbed stones together. Sparks flew. Smoke rose. Soon flames leapt into the night sky. Light spread. Warmth spread. The cubs gasped and stared at the fire. They felt safety for the first time since the trial began. The predators saw the flames too. Glowing eyes moved closer. Shapes of giant beasts slid between the trees. Their fangs glistened in the firelight. Their growls rolled through the night air like thunder. The cubs whimpered and pressed closer to the human. But the man did not run. He did not hide. He stood tall, his arms spread wide. His voice rose in a roar. He swung burning branches, and sparks flew into the dark. The beasts snarled but stopped. They paced at the edge of light, their hunger deep, but their fear of fire deeper. They did not dare step into the flames, not while the human guarded it. The cubs looked up at him with new eyes. They no longer saw a stranger. They saw a shield. They saw safety. They saw strength. The human crouched down again. He touched their heads with care. He fed them small fruits he had gathered. He whispered again in that strange voice that meant nothing yet somehow meant everything. The cubs curled against him, their eyes heavy with sleep. The predators circled. The elders watched. The human remained awake, his gaze sharp, his body ready, his fire alive. In that first night the council saw something they did not expect. They saw a man with no weapon stand against beasts. They saw fragile flesh protect alien young. They saw calm where fear should be. They saw strength where weakness was assumed. And though they did not say it yet, deep in their cold hearts they began to wonder if the whispers about humans were not just tales, but truth. The night was deep and endless, the sky above the forest black with no moon, and no star to give comfort. The only light came from the fire the human had built with his bare hands, a small circle of warmth in a sea of shadows. The cubs huddled close to the fire, their silver fur glowing faintly in the flickering flames, their eyes wide with fear each time the wind carried the cry of some hidden beast, their small bodies shivering not only from cold, but also from dread. The human sat with them, his back straight, his shoulders strong, his face calm, his eyes watching the trees without pause. Every crack of a branch, every whisper of a leaf, every distant growl reached his ears. He did not close his eyes. He did not allow sleep to claim him. He knew the predators watched, waiting for the flames to falter, waiting for a moment of weakness. But he did not yield. Instead, he fed the fire, adding branches, adding leaves, adding dry bark until the circle of light grew brighter, a shield of fire and smoke. The cubs leaned against him, tiny claws clutching at his arm, their small breath shaky. They did not understand his words, but they felt the rhythm of his voice when he spoke, soft and steady, a sound like flowing water, a sound that made them feel less alone. They had never seen a creature like him. No fur, no tail, no sharp teeth. Yet he made them feel safe, safer than the guards who once carried them, safer than the elders who had sent them into the jaws of the wild. Above the forest in hidden towers of stone and metal the council watched through glowing screens, their eyes narrow, their voices quiet. They whispered to one another about the strange human who had not run, who had not left the cubs, who had faced predators with only fire and a roar. One elder said this was luck. Another said this was stubbornness. Another said it was madness. But none of them could look away. None of them could deny that the human had changed the first night into something unexpected. The hours crawled like shadows stretching across the ground. The cubs grew restless, their bellies empty, their thirst heavy. The human rose and moved with quiet steps. He left the fire for a short time. He searched the ground and the trees, his eyes sharp in the dim light. He found fruits hidden in low bushes, bitter roots buried in soil, cool water dripping from wide leaves. He returned with these treasures, kneeling beside the cubs, breaking food into small pieces, lifting water with cupped hands. He gave them what they needed. He gave without taking for himself, his stomach empty, his throat dry, but his care unbroken. The cubs looked at him with glowing eyes, their fear softening into trust, their small mouths chewing, their voices whispering soft sounds, sounds of comfort, sounds of relief. The human smiled, a small curve of lips that meant more than words, and though he was still surrounded by danger, though beasts circled in the dark, though hunger pressed upon him, he gave all to the cubs, and they pressed closer to him as if they had always belonged to his side. The predators did not sleep. They circled and circled, their glowing eyes staring through the shadows, their hunger rising as the smell of fruit and flesh reached them. They growled. They snapped their jaws. They scraped their claws against trees. The cubs trembled, but the human did not fear. He rose again. He took branches from the fire. He waved them high, sparks leaping into the sky, flames crackling, his voice roaring across the night like thunder. The beasts snarled but stayed back there, fear of fire deep in their blood. They waited still, but they did not strike. The council leaned closer to their screens, their voices sharper. Some said he was clever. Some said he was reckless. Some said he was only delaying the end. Yet in their hearts they felt unease, because the cubs no longer cried for home, no longer cried for parents. They clung to the human as if he was their protector, as if he was one of them, and the elders did not expect such a bond to form so quickly. They had thought the cubs would reject him. They had thought the cubs would die in fear. Yet here they were alive, fed, warmed, comforted. The forest shifted as dawn crept closer. The night beasts began to fade into their lairs. The shadows thinned. The cries of danger grew quiet. The cubs yawned and pressed their heads against the human's chest. their eyes closing with peace. The man at last allowed himself a slow breath, his body weary, his skin scratched, his muscles tight, yet he did not close his eyes. He remained awake, watching the forest, guarding the small lives in his arms, his fire still burning, his spirit unbroken. When the first rays of sun pierced through the canopy, the council expected to see ruin. They expected to see cubs torn, fire gone, human defeated. But what they saw was life. What they saw was strength. What they saw was the human sitting tall with cubs asleep around him, the fire glowing steady beside him, and predators retreating into shadows that could not pierce the light of day. The elders were silent, their throats dry, their voices gone. They looked at one another and saw unease in each other's eyes. One of them whispered that the human had passed the first night. Another whispered that perhaps they should end the trial before more was revealed. But the highest elder raised a hand and said, "No. We will watch. We will see how far this strange being can go. We will see if he can endure hunger, storms, beasts, and time itself. Only then will we know if the whisper's about. Humans are truth." The human did not know of the council watching. He did not know of their doubts or their fear. He only knew of the cubs in his care. He knew they were small. He knew they were weak. He knew they could not survive without him. And so he chose again, as he had chosen in the night, to guard them, to feed them, to teach them, to stand between them and the shadows, because for him this was not a test. It was a duty. It was life. The cubs woke with the morning, their eyes brighter, their steps lighter, their voices soft but playful. They followed him as he searched for more food. They clung to him when the forest whispered danger. They trusted him with all their small hearts. And though the test had only begun, though many days and nights still waited with threats unseen, already the cubs had chosen their guardian. Already the cubs had chosen their protector. Already they had chosen the human. The sun rose again over the wide forest, its light spilling through heavy branches. Yet the warmth of the morning did not bring ease. It brought hunger, hunger that pressed upon the cubs with small claws of pain in their bellies, hunger that pressed upon the human with a dull ache that he did not show. The cubs whimpered softly, their voices trembling, their eyes filled with need. The man listened and his heart grew heavy. He had given them fruit, he had given them roots, yet the forest was not kind. Food was little, water was scattered, survival was cruel. He looked upon the cubs, their silver fur dim in the light, their small bodies weak, yet their trust in him unshaken. They clung to him when their bellies hurt. They pressed against his arms when fear rose. He knew he must give them more. He must teach them to find what the forest hid. So he rose, gathering them close, and walked deeper into the green shadows, the cubs stumbling after him, their paws clumsy, their steps unsure, but their will strong because he was with them. The forest was endless, the trees like towers, the air thick with scent of damp soil, the cries of unseen beasts echoing from every side. The human searched with careful eyes, his hands brushing leaves, his feet testing ground. He found streams that glimmered between rocks. He taught the cubs to drink, lowering their heads gently, showing them how water soothed their thirst. The cubs lapped eagerly, their eyes bright with surprise, for they had never drunk this way before, never felt life so. Raw and simple, they laughed, their voices soft but filled with wonder, and the human smiled, though he drank little himself, keeping most for them. The council far above watched every moment, their screens glowing with images of the human leading the cubs. Their voices hushed. Some elders spoke with doubt, saying he would fall soon, that his body would break without food, that his kindness was weakness. Others said he was clever, that he turned weakness into strength, that he bound the cubs to him with care instead of force. The debate grew sharp, yet none could deny that the cubs followed him willingly. None could deny that the human had given them hope. Days passed in the forest. Hunger grew like a shadow that stretched long. The human ate almost nothing, only small scraps that the cubs did not want. His body thinner, his face sharp with weariness, yet he did not complain. He did not falter. When the cubs cried in pain, he lifted them, carrying them across rocks and streams. When they stumbled, he held their hands. When they grew cold, he wrapped them in his arms, his strength not in muscle alone, but in heart that refused to bend. One evening the cubs found berries upon a thorn bush. They rushed with excitement. their voices bright. But the human stopped them, his hand gentle but firm. He touched the berries to his lips. He spat quickly, shaking his head. The cubs watched wide-eyed. They understood. The berries were danger. The human had taken a risk, so they would not suffer. He smiled softly, though bitterness burned his mouth, and turned their eyes to safer roots, to leaves they could chew, teaching them to know the difference between poison and food, their minds learning with each step, their trust growing deeper with each lesson. The predators did not leave. They followed in silence, their glowing eyes always near. They watched as the cubs moved. They smelled their weakness. They hungered for easy prey. Yet each time they came close, the human stood tall, his fire blazing, his roar filling the forest, his arms spread wide, and the cubs behind him like stars clinging to the night sky. The beast circled but never struck, fear of fire holding them back. The cubs learned to gather wood, to pile it high, to help him keep the flames alive. And in this they learned more than survival. They learned unity. They learned trust in his guidance. The nights grew colder. The cubs curled against him, their small bodies pressed tight. He stayed awake, watching, waiting, adding fuel to the fire, his own body weary, yet his will unbroken. The council whispered again, asking why he gave his strength away, asking why he cared for cubs not his own, asking why he chose to suffer instead of save himself. And one elder whispered that perhaps this was the true danger of humans, not their weapons, not their armies, but their refusal to let the weak fall. On the 5th day, hunger reached its peak. The cubs could no longer walk far, their legs trembling, their eyes heavy. The human carried 2 upon his shoulders, another in his arms, his steps slow but steady, his breath heavy but sure. He searched deeper. He listened to the forest. He heard the call of birds. He saw where they landed. He found trees heavy with fruit, high above, far from reach. He did not stop. He climbed, his hands gripping rough bark, his body scraping against wood, his muscles burning. Yet he did not fall. He reached the branches. He shook them. Fruit rained down. The cubs cried with joy. They ate, their small bellies filled, their eyes shining once more. The human rested little, his own hunger unending. Yet he smiled at their laughter. He touched their heads gently. He spoke soft words they did not know. Yet the tone carried comfort. The cubs curled against him again, their bellies full, their hearts safe. And he closed his eyes for only a moment, his breath slow, his arms still guarding them, his body the wall between them and the wild. The council stared in silence, their debate gone, for what they saw shook them. They saw a creature thin and weary, yet unyielding. They saw cubs alive and strong where death should have claimed them. They saw patience. They saw love. They saw something their own kind had forgotten long ago. One elder spoke with trembling voice, saying no beast should give so much for another. Yet this human did. Another elder whispered that perhaps the test had turned against them, that perhaps it was not the human being judged, but themselves. The days of hunger did not break him. The forest did not defeat him. The predators did not claim him. The cubs did not lose hope. And in this trial of pain and need, a bond was formed, a bond that no council could break. The cubs no longer looked at him as stranger. They looked at him as family. And though the trial was not over, though greater threats still waited, already a truth had been born. The human had shown that even in hunger, even in weakness, he would never abandon the young placed in his care. And so the forest whispered of his strength. The predators watched with fear and respect. The cubs followed with joy and trust. And the council far above began to see the first crack in their belief, the first sign that the whispers about humans were not only stories, but warnings, and soon those warnings would grow into truths too heavy to ignore. The forest had grown restless, its shadows heavy, its branches trembling with voices that spoke of danger. The cubs had learned to walk with lighter steps, to listen to the human's hand as he guided them, to keep close to the fire when the night rose. Yet even as they grew stronger, even as they laughed in brief moments of calm, the air thickened with something darker, something heavier. The human felt it before the cubs did, his eyes watching the tree-line, his body tense like a bow drawn tight. He knew a greater threat was coming. For days the smaller predators had circled, their glowing eyes appearing and fading, their growls carrying across the night. Yet none dared attack, fear of fire and fear of the man's roar holding them back. But the forest whispered of another, a beast not like the others, a beast older and larger, a beast that did not fear fire or stone, a beast that had claimed the forest as its throne long before the cubs were born. It sank carried in the air, its steps shaking the ground. The cubs trembled, though they could not see it yet, their instinct screaming of something monstrous. The human gathered wood with restless hands, piling branches higher, making the flames roar bright, sparks flying like stars. The cubs helped, their tiny paws clumsy but eager. They knew the fire was life. They knew the fire kept the dark at bay. Yet as the night deepened, the ground itself seemed to shiver. Trees groaned, leaves shook, and from the shadows came a sound unlike any before, a growl so deep it felt like thunder rolling inside the chest. The cubs froze, their eyes wide, their voices small and filled with fear. The human stood tall, his body between them and the dark, his arms spread, his fire held high. The beast emerged, its form vast, its head higher than the branches, its eyes glowing like molten stone, its fangs long as blades, its claws carving the earth with every step, its body heavy with muscle, its fur matted with scars. This was no hunter of prey. This was a king of death. The cubs whimpered, pressing against the human's legs. The council above leaned closer to their glowing screens, their voices sharp with unease, for they had not expected this. They had not expected the forest to reveal such a terror. They whispered that the human would fall, that no fire could stop this monster. The human did not move aside. He lifted the burning branch high. He roared with a voice fierce and raw. His sound carried across the night, like lightning through storm clouds. Yet the beast did not retreat. It stepped closer, its breath hot like fire, its growls shaking the trees. It was not afraid. The cubs screamed, their voices small against the roar of the monster. The human swung the burning wood, sparks scattering, the flames brushing the beast's fur. But it did not stop. It struck with claws that cut the ground like knives. The man stumbled back, the cubs clutching his arms. Yet he did not run, his eyes locked on the beast with defiance. He grabbed stone, sharp and rough. He tied it with vine to a branch, shaping a weapon from nothing. His hand swift though his breath was heavy. He stood again, his body bleeding where claws had grazed, his skin torn, yet his spirit unbroken. The beast lunged, its jaws wide, its fangs gleaming. The human thrust the spear, stone biting into flesh. Blood spilled dark and steaming. The beast roared in rage. The cubs cried. The council gasped in silence. Yet the man did not falter. He struck again. Again, each blow filled with will, each movement filled with fire. The beast clawed him, tearing skin, leaving red trails across his body. He fell to one knee, pain burning through him. Yet he rose again, lifting the burning branch, pressing forward, pushing the flames against the beast's face. Its roar shook the heavens, its eyes furious. But the fire bit deeper than the stone. The smell of burning fur filled the air. The monster reared back, striking trees with its massive body, the ground shaking as if the forest itself cried in fear. The cubs clung tighter to the human, their tears falling, their voices calling in sounds of sorrow and hope. The fight raged like storm and fire. The man smaller, weaker, his body bloodied. Yet each time he fell he rose. Each time he stumbled he stood. Each strike of claw answered with flame and stone, his will unyielding. The cubs watching with eyes wide, their hearts knowing that he fought not for himself, but for them. He could have fled. He could have saved his life. Yet he chose to stand. He chose to give all for their survival. At last the beast roared in fury, its body smoking, its wounds deep, its eyes filled with rage but also with fear it had never known before. It backed away, its massive frame fading into shadows, its growl echoing as it vanished into the depths of the forest. The human stood trembling, his arms weak, his chest heaving, his blood dripping into the dirt. Yet he remained upright, his eyes sharp, his fire still alive. The cubs ran to him, their small hands touching his wounds, their voices filled with cries. They pressed against him, licking his cuts, refusing to leave his side. The council above was silent. No elder spoke, their voices stolen by what they had seen. They had thought the human would fall, They had thought the cubs would be lost. Yet here he stood, battered but unbroken, bloodied but alive, and the cubs clinging to him not with fear, but with love. The elders looked at each other and saw doubt in their eyes, doubt of their old beliefs, doubt of their test, doubt of their own cold hearts. The human sank to the ground, his body weary, his strength drained, yet his arms still around the cubs, holding them safe, his eyes watching the shadows though heavy with exhaustion. The cubs curled against him, whispering soft sounds, their trust complete, their bond unbreakable. They had seen him fight the king of beasts. They had seen him bleed for them. They had seen him choose them above his own life. And in their hearts something eternal was carved. He was no longer stranger, no longer outsider. He was protector. He was family. The fire burned low, the dawn rising again, the forest quiet, the threat gone for now. Yet the mark of that night would never fade. Not for the cubs, not for the human, not for the council who had watched with eyes wide and hearts shaken, for they had seen a truth they could not deny, that even against the greatest of threats, even against a monster that ruled the dark, the human had stood, the human had fought, the human had not surrendered. The forest lay quiet after the night of fire and blood. The giant beast had vanished into the endless shadows, its roar fading into the distance. Yet the memory of its claws and fangs lingered in the air, like smoke that would never leave. The cubs clung to the human with trembling paws, their small eyes wide with awe and sorrow. They had seen him bleed. They had seen him rise again when any other would have fallen. They had seen him shield them with his body, though it meant pain, though it meant death could come at any moment, and their hearts beat with a new truth. He was theirs, and they were his. The human sat beneath the tall trees, his body torn, his skin marked with red trails, his breath heavy yet steady. The cubs pressed against him, refusing to let go, their tiny voices soft with worry, their small hands touching his wounds with care. They did not understand his words, but they understood his spirit, and he answered their fear with calm, his eyes gentle though his body carried agony, his hands still warm though his strength drained away. As dawn spread across the forest, the cubs lay close, their bellies full from the fruit he had found, their breath soft, their dreams peaceful for the first time since the trial began. And while they slept, the human spoke, his voice low, his tone steady, words not meant for the cubs alone, but for the forest, for the council that watched from far above, for the shadows that listened in silence. He spoke of his home. He spoke of Earth. He told of a world both kind and cruel, a world of ice and fire, of storms and oceans, of mountains that cut the sky. He spoke of how humans had once lived in caves, how they had carried fire through endless winters, how they had guarded their children against beasts that towered above them, how they had fought hunger with hands empty yet hearts unbroken. He spoke of mothers who starved so their young could eat, of fathers who walked through storms so their children could live, of brothers and sisters who carried one another across deserts and seas. His voice was soft yet strong, carrying the weight of countless lives before him. The cubs stirred in their sleep, their ears twitching at his sound, their bodies pressing closer, their dreams filled with warmth. They did not know the meaning of his words, yet they felt the truth within them. The forest listened too. The fire crackled, the leaves whispered, the air held still as if the world itself wanted to hear the human secret. Far above, the elders leaned close to their screens, their eyes narrow, their voices hushed. They heard his words, though not all understood them. They saw the fire in his eyes, though his body trembled with weakness. One elder whispered that this was only memory, that it meant nothing, but another shook his head, saying that memory is strength, that a race who carried such stories carried more than weapons, more than armies. They carried a spirit that did not bend. The human spoke still, telling how humans saw children, not as burden but as treasure, not as weakness but as hope. He said that for his kind any child was sacred, not only their own blood, not only their own flesh, but any young who could not defend themselves. To protect them was not a choice. To protect them was life itself. The cubs were safe because he had chosen them, but in truth he had no choice, for his heart could never allow him to turn away. The cubs awoke with the rising sun, their small eyes bright though their bodies weary. They looked at him with trust that could not be broken. They touched his face with gentle paws. They licked his hands with soft devotion, and though they did not speak his tongue, they answered his secret with their own, their eyes glowing with bond, their hearts tied to his. They belonged to him, and he belonged to them. The council whispered again, their voices filled with unease. Some said the test had gone too far, that the cubs were no longer subjects but his family, that the human had already succeeded in ways they could not measure. Others said they must continue, that more nights would break him, that more hunger would shatter him, that his spirit was only a mask. Yet as they spoke they saw the cubs, and the cubs were not afraid. They were not broken, they were alive, laughing, playing, stronger than when the trial began, and all because of the human who carried them. The day grew long. The human walked with the cubs, teaching them to gather, showing them which plants gave food, which streams gave water, which stones could spark fire. He placed knowledge in their small minds with patient hands, never striking them when they failed, never shouting when they stumbled, only lifting them again, only guiding them with care. His secret was not only love, but teaching. His secret was giving strength, so that even the weakest could stand. When night returned, he built fire again, brighter and higher. The cubs brought twigs, laughing as sparks danced in the air, their fear of the dark less than before, their voices soft with joy, their trust deep as roots. They curled around him as stars blinked above, their small breaths warm upon his chest, and the human smiled faintly though his wounds burned, though his hunger clawed inside, his secret keeping him alive, his secret giving him reason beyond pain. The forest held still, predators watching but not daring, their glowing eyes peering from far, yet none stepped close, for they had seen the great beast defeated. They had seen fire turned into weapon. They had seen a man who fought like storm, and they kept their distance, waiting, circling, but no longer fearless. The elders did not speak as they watched, silence heavy in their chamber, their eyes upon the man and the cubs, their hearts unwilling to admit what they now knew, that the human secret was not weapon, not fire, not stone, but something greater, something they could not create with science, something they could not command with armies. It was the will to protect without thought of self. It was the power to give all for those who could not give back, and in that secret lay a strength far more dangerous than claws or blades. The human closed his eyes for a short moment, his arms still around the cubs, his breath slow, his mind whispering of home, of distant lands where children laughed by rivers, where mothers sang to newborns beneath stars, where fathers built fires in the cold. His secret lived in those memories, and he carried them into the forest, into the trial, into every breath he gave. The cubs safe against him, the fire bright, the night held at bay, the council silent, and the universe shifting quietly around the truth that could no longer be denied. The forest was no longer the same as when the trial began. The cubs were no longer weak and trembling. They were stronger, their eyes brighter, their steps steadier. They had learned to drink from streams, to choose safe routes, to carry twigs for fire. They had learned to laugh even when shadows pressed close, and all of this came from the human who had given them his strength, his hunger, his blood, his time. Yet far above in their chamber of light the council sat restless, their voices low, their hearts uneasy, for what they saw shook them more than the beasts of the wild. The council had expected failure. They had expected the cubs to perish within hours. They had expected the human to abandon them when hunger and danger closed in. They had expected to prove the whispers false. But what they witnessed was opposite. They saw cubs alive. They saw cubs stronger than before. They saw cubs who clung to the human as if he was kin. And they saw a man who did not seek reward, who did not seek victory, but who gave without end, who stood even when broken, who protected. With every breath, one elder with eyes like cold glass whispered that this was dangerous, that if the cubs lived they would never return to the council as before. They would never again trust their own kind with the same love. Another elder said it did not matter, that the trial must continue until the human broke, until he could give no more. But the words rang hollow, for deep inside they all felt the same fear, the fear that no breaking would come, the fear that the human would endure until the very end. The council had always believed strength was measured in armies, in weapons, in walls of steel and fleets of fire. Yet before them was a man with no weapon, no army, no armor, And still he commanded loyalty that no soldier could win. Still he held the hearts of the cubs more tightly than any oath or law. Still he fought beasts with hands and fire and lived. And this was a kind of power they did not understand, a power that made them whisper in unease when they looked at each other. The human did not know of their fear. He only knew of the cubs in his care. He led them deeper through the forest, his wounds healing slowly, his hunger burning, yet his steps steady. The cubs followed with laughter, their small voices soft but joyful. They carried sticks proudly. They searched for fruit eagerly. They returned to him with wide eyes when they found water trickling down stone. They were no longer helpless, yet they still leaned on him. They still pressed close when the wind carried growls. They still curled against him when the fire burned in the night. At dusk predators gathered again, their glowing eyes circling, their hunger rising, yet none dared to step too close, for they had seen the great beast fall back. They had seen the fire rise against their kind. They had seen a human roar louder than thunder, and they feared the fire he carried within his spirit. The cubs saw them too, and though they trembled, they trusted the man, their fear softened by his presence, their courage shaped by his shadow. The elders whispered again, their voices sharp with doubt. They spoke of ending the test. They spoke of calling the human back. They spoke of pulling the cubs away before the bond grew too deep. But none of them could act, for to end the trial would be to admit defeat, to admit that the whispers were true, to admit that the fragile race of Earth carried something greater than the old empires of the stars. So they remained silent, watching with heavy hearts, waiting for the moment when he would stumble, when he would fall. Yet each day passed, and that moment never came. The cubs began to change in ways that made the elders restless. They no longer looked to the shadows with terror. They looked with curiosity. They no longer whimpered at hunger. They shared what they found with each other. They no longer clung in silence. They played with laughter even when the dark pressed near. And all of this came from the human, from his teaching, from his endless giving. The council saw this and felt dread, for the cubs were not just surviving, they were thriving, and it was because of him. One night, when the fire crackled bright and the stars shone faintly through the trees, the cubs curled close, and the human rested with weary arms. The council listened as he spoke again, his voice low, his words simple. He spoke of home, of children on earth who learned to stand on shaky legs, of fathers who carried them across rivers, of mothers who shielded them from storms. He spoke of sacrifice. He spoke of love, and the cubs listened though they did not know his tongue, their eyes wide with wonder, their hearts filled with warmth. The elders listened too, and their hearts filled with unease. For the human's words carried weight beyond the trial. They carried memory. They carried truth. They carried a vision of life, where the young were sacred, where the weak were never left behind, where strength was measured not in what one could take, but in what one could protect. And this was a vision the council had long abandoned, a vision they no longer believed in. Yet here it was alive in a single man from a fragile world, and it frightened them. As days turned into nights and nights into days, the cubs grew into his shadow, learning each lesson, holding each gift, their bond deeper than blood, their voices calling for him when danger came, their laughter rising when safety returned, and the council realized the truth they had tried to deny. The test was no longer theirs. It belonged to the human. It belonged to the cubs, and they were no longer observers of failure, but witnesses of something greater. The elders gathered in silence, their voices hushed, their eyes troubled. One whispered that if humans spread this spirit across the stars, no race would resist them, not by fear, not by fire, but by loyalty. Another whispered that perhaps this was why other species feared them, not for their armies, not for their weapons, but for their hearts. And the chamber grew colder with each word, their fear rising, for they saw that what had begun as a cruel test was becoming a revelation that threatened the very way they ruled. The human sat by the fire, his wound slowly healing, his hunger never gone, yet his eyes steady. The cubs curled against him, their breath soft, their trust complete. The forest quiet for now, the predators watching but keeping distance, and above them the council filled with fear. Fear not of the forest, fear not of beasts, fear not of hunger, but fear of the truth they could not silence. Fear of the human who had turned weakness into strength. fear of the bond that no weapon could break. And in that fear the elders knew their power was less than they believed, for they ruled with law, with force, with armies. But this man ruled hearts with nothing but fire, with nothing but his hands, with nothing but his will. And that was a strength they could never control, a strength they could never take, a strength they could never end. The dawn rose golden over the wide forest, its light spilling across the trees, like fire across stone. The cubs awoke with soft voices and bright eyes, their small paws reaching for the human, their trust complete, their bond unbroken. They no longer trembled as they once had. They no longer cried when the shadow stirred. They had learned courage in his presence. They had learned patience from his hands. They had learned love from his heart. And as they gathered close to him, their laughter, rising above the whispers of the wild, the council far above looked on with heavy silence, their fear now grown into something they could not hide. The elders had once believed this trial would prove humanity weak. They had believed it would show the whispers false. They had believed it would remind the galaxy that humans were nothing but fragile creatures of flesh. But instead the opposite had been revealed. The human had turned the cruel test into a story of hope. The cubs lived because of him. The cubs thrived because of him. And the cubs refused to see him as anything other than guardian and kin. And the council's hearts trembled at this sight. They gathered in their chamber of silver and stone, their voices low, their eyes avoiding one another. One elder whispered that the trial must end, that the cubs must be taken back. Yet another shook his head with sorrow, saying that the cubs no longer belonged to them. They belonged to him now. Another voice rose with fear, saying that if humanity's secret spread across the stars, if their will to protect touched other young of other races, no empire could resist them, for hearts once given could never be taken back by force. The chamber grew colder with each word, their pride breaking beneath the weight of truth. In the forest the human walked with the cubs, his wounds healed into scars, his hunger eased but never gone, yet his spirit shining brighter than before. He taught them again, showing how to tie vines to wood, showing how to lift stones for shelter, showing how to listen to the calls of birds for signs of danger. The cubs followed each step, eager, their eyes wide, their paws steady, their voices filled with joy. And though they were still young, they now carried wisdom given by his hands, wisdom carved into their hearts. When the night came again, the fire rose high, its flames tall against the dark. The cubs gathered close, their bodies warm against his, their laughter soft like music. And the human smiled though his eyes carried weariness. He told them stories again in words they did not know, yet feelings they understood. Stories of earth, stories of children who played in fields, of rivers that sang beneath the stars, of families who gave everything so the young could live. The cubs listened, their eyes glowing with wonder, their hearts swelling with trust, and far above the council listened too, their fear deepening, for they felt the power of his words even across distance. The elders met again, their voices harsh with unease. Some argued that humanity must be watched, that they must never be allowed to rise too far. Others argued that it was already too late, that the cubs had shown the truth, that even if the human was taken away the memory would never die. The cubs would carry it, the cubs would tell it, and their kind would never see the world the same again. And in that moment the council realized they were no longer judges. They were beggars before a truth greater than themselves. At dawn soldiers came with ships of iron and engines of fire. The cubs looked up with wide eyes, their bodies tense, their voices filled with confusion. They clung to the human, unwilling to leave his side. The soldiers tried to lift them away, their hands cold, their armor bright. Yet the cubs cried out, their paws clutching his arms, their tears falling, their voices breaking with sorrow. They did not want to go. They did not trust the soldiers. They trusted only him, their protector, their guardian, their family. The human rose, his body thin but strong, his arms holding the cubs close, his eyes calm yet sharp. He did not fight. He did not shout, but he stood like a mountain between the children and the soldiers, his presence alone enough to freeze them in place. The council watched with heavy hearts. They had wanted proof of weakness, but now they had proof of power, not the kind forged in fire and steel, but the kind born of love and sacrifice. And it frightened them. The cubs cried louder when the soldiers tried again, their voices raw, their bodies shaking, One cub pressed its head against the man's chest and whispered a single sound, a sound not of fear, but of plea. Guardian, protector, father. The human looked down, his eyes soft, his arms firm, and he held them tighter. And in that moment the council's last wall of denial shattered. The elders gathered once more, their pride gone, their voices trembling. One spoke the words none wished to say, that they must beg humanity to guard their young, for no other race had shown such spirit. No other race had given so much for those not of their blood. No other race had endured hunger, wounds, and fear only to smile at the laughter of children. They bowed their heads. They admitted what they had refused to believe. They asked for help. They asked for guidance. They asked for protection. In the forest the human heard none of their words. He only felt the cubs clinging to him. He only heard their voices filled with love. He only saw their eyes shining with trust. And he smiled faintly, his arms lifting one into the air, his voice soft as he whispered words they did not know yet understood with their hearts. Words of safety, words of promise, words that said they would never be alone. The cubs laughed through tears, their voices rising with joy, their bond eternal. The council saw this and knew the truth. The most dangerous race was not feared for their armies, not feared for their weapons, not feared for their power of destruction, but feared for their hearts, feared for their refusal to abandon the weak, feared for their love that turned strangers into family. And they trembled, for they knew that such a force could never be broken, never be silenced, never be undone. And so the trial ended not with failure, not with death, but with revelation, a revelation that spread through the hearts of the elders, through the halls of the council, through the whispers of the galaxy. Humanity was not dangerous because of claws or fire. Humanity was dangerous because they could love with such strength that even the fiercest beasts fled, even the coldest hearts bowed, and even the proudest rulers begged for their guidance. The cubs slept safe in his arms, the fire burning steady beside them, the forest quiet, the dawn bright, the council silent, and the universe forever changed by the secret they had tried to test, but instead had been forced to witness, the secret of humanity, the secret of love.